board meeting to order today, and first of all, on behalf of our members, I'd like to welcome our new member, and that should go into the minutes, and welcome Rick Devereaux. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, welcome your service.
Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm very grateful for the support of the board to be part of the team here. Thank you.
I think you're gonna be a great asset. First order of business, which is under unfinished, is the swearing in of our fifth member. So, the deputy clerk. Sarah Pullinger.
All right, so I'm gonna get you to raise your right hand and your left hand on the Bible. And then, repeat after me. I'm gonna try to break it up, so. I, Richard Devereaux,
I, Richard Devereaux,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and the laws of the United States
the Constitution and the laws of the United States
and the Constitution and the laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and the laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will in all respects
and that I will in all respects
support the provisions of the Charter of the City of Asheville
support the provisions of the Charter of the City of Asheville
and the ordinances of the City of Asheville,
and the ordinances of the City of Asheville,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
as a member of the Civil Service Board, so help me God.
as a member of the Civil Service Board, so help me God.
Yay. If I can get you to sign
Okay.
here. Now I'm gonna go city seal this, and I'm gonna send it to staff for the records.
All right,
Thank you.
Since we didn't have an opportunity yesterday to do this during the formal interview, why don't we just go around the table and each of you can introduce yourself
Sure.
to Rick Devereaux and
I am Peggy Rowe, I'm the Assistant City Manager, and my job is Human Resources Director when I'm not in the interim.
And I'm Jamie Joyner, I'm the interim Human Resources Director, and I'm the Assistant Human Resources Director.
Okay.
And I'm Caroline Long, I am the Human Resources Generalist for Compensation.
Great, thank you all. Our second order of business today is a discussion of changes to the Civil Service Act. And Peggy, are you gonna take the,
I am not, I don't have any new information on that. Are you, I'm here to primarily talk about the orientation that you asked me to do, but I'm not
Okay.
familiar, or,
That was, I'm sorry.
was that a
That
carry?
was something you all asked to put on the agenda at one of the previous continuations of the meeting. I think it may have been the July 12th.
okay,
And I'm not sure if Mr. Henning was gonna provide that update.
Maybe that could be deferred until,
yes,
I believe what I had requested in June was that I would like to see the legislative material that the city had presented and was going to present to the legislature.
and, I apologize, that's an item of council, and I don't have that. I'm certainly happy to provide that at your next meeting.
I believe that's what we have here. It's, Senate Bill 556,
Could be.
an act to revise the laws relating to the Asheville Civil Service Board.
That's the current.
That's.
Oh, okay, I
that
got
sounds
you,
Current,
okay,
yes.
I'm sorry, okay.
It's possible perhaps at our next scheduled business meeting that we could take a look at that then?
Sure.
That wouldn't be until September then.
We are in August, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Right,
If possible, I would request that perhaps the board could receive a copy of those
Okay.
by email.
in advance
And
of the
be
meeting.
prepared for
Yeah.
discussion.
That would give us the, a chance to at least look it over
Okay, sure.
and we, and our next meeting, by the way, is, Thursday, September 6th, by the way.
Okay.
So, 6:30 in this room.
Thursday, September sixth.
Right, and we're always gonna meet on the first Thursday of each month, unless we have no business, to discuss at that meeting. And then it's canceled. And we'll receive advance notice on gas stations. Okay. So we'll take a look at that, when we receive a copy, and hopefully be prepared to, talk about it at that meeting.
Sure.
Just a question, when will we be approving or reviewing the minutes of the July meeting?
I'm so sorry, I did not put that on here. I think I was
Yeah.
flustered with all the different versions, but you can approve them now if you would like to make a motion. There's 3 separate,
Right.
printouts of each continuation of the meeting.
And a copy of the, discussion from yesterday.
Yes.
I hope most of you have had an opportunity, at all, to look these over, and, has anybody, or does anybody have any additions or corrections to the minutes, these meetings? Is there a motion to approve them?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we approve minutes, July minutes, that covered all 3 meetings.
Since they were continuation. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there a call for approval of the motion now? Is there a vote? We should vote, I should say, on the approval of the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are accepted as presented to us. It's gonna be a short meeting today.
That's a good thing, you've had a lot of meetings.
Is there any new business?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, you do have the update on the police promotional process documentation?
I think that's what we received
Yes, so
previously.
are you comfortable with where we are on that issue, or? Since I know
Mark, did
we
you-
talked about it yesterday.
I did a little further research and found the policy from 2014, which I think you've referred to as being online now. And then just give me this to make sure we're talking about the same document. I did not make copies for our clerk.
I have it, the last revision of 2016, is
The
it?
16 is the last time that you all made, or
2016.
saw changes to that. And that policy that I sent to you all yesterday is the one that's currently posted on the intranet for APD. And then following, or behind that policy that I sent to you all yesterday, and I apologize, Mr. Devereaux, I didn't send it to you, were the minutes from the February 2016 Civil Service Board meeting where the changes in the procedure were approved. And then attached to that was a letter from Chief Hooper recommending those changes. So that's what I sent via email yesterday.
Right.
Now, what I believe has occurred, which I shared yesterday briefly, is that the classification, the job classification, or the job description it's commonly called, that frequently contains the minimum requirements for the job, get pulled down when there's any revisions to those kinds of things. And that that will be put back on the intranet, if not by the end of this week, certainly by the early part of next week, so that that the police department and others will easily be able to find that and review what the requirements are to.
Can you also provide us with a copy of that.
Yes, sir.
And that's on the internet,
Yes.
intra.
And to clarify, we would like the job specifications for all those in APD and fire department?
The promotional, only for those that require a competitive promotional process.
Okay, so
Sergeant,
lieutenant,
lieutenant.
sergeant, captain.
Sergeant, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll have those, and they may
Okay.
already be there, because Stephanie was trying to
Post
get
those.
that done,
Okay.
at least by early next week.
You must have received this. You probably did, we got a flurry of email yesterday, so.
If you didn't, Mr. Rosen, if you'll let me know, I'll be glad to send that. I didn't get a return, but it may have gotten trapped somewhere.
And Mr. Devereaux doesn't have a copy, but he will, at the end of the day or soon.
You were not,
Okay.
but we'll make sure.
Okay.
you get
So if you would include he and I,
Yeah.
that would be fine.
Carol, did you,
I got it.
okay,
I didn't have time to print it all off, but I did get it. Looked at it yesterday afternoon, briefly.
Did you receive it?
so Caroline, perhaps at the next meeting, and we'll have some updates then, that are being posted, I guess, today or the next day or two, on the,
Well, they're not changes.
Okay.
They're just.
but they
gonna
weren't
post-
part of this document,
Correct.
yeah.
They're not what happened is we removed the class and I don't even know if this is the issue that Mr. Rosen brought up. I just, in the context of trying to answer the question that he had, it occurred to me that might be what people are looking for.
Okay,
It's
at
not
least we'll have an
the
overview.
procedure and not the policy so
Right.
much as, where's that class specification that
Right.
I'm used to seeing, and that was not there.
Right.
So my being unfamiliar with the 2016 update, what people are telling me is that policy, the description of what's required to be eligible was only partially available. Sergeants, has been updated, lieutenants, apparently has since we last spoke, and there's still no reference that I'm aware of for
Captain,
captain.
yeah, and I didn't see that in here when I was looking at it, yeah. So,
All right.
it'll be more complete the next time, and if there's any questions, let's at least put that on the agenda for the September meeting.
Okay.
And we can review it at that time. And then the other item for the September meeting will be discussion probably led by our outside counsel, John Henning, on the issues related to substantive reviews.
Substantive rules.
Yeah, rules reviews, so we'll have both those items for discussion in September.
I'm gonna say thank you for pursuing this.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and you've been really good about getting us updated
My pleasure.
on our requests. Okay, so we do have those two items that will be on the agenda for the September meeting. We're gonna hear, I'm sure, at that meeting, some information from Mr. Henning on potential dates for scheduled grievances.
Yes, sir.
And we'll make sure everybody brings their calendars, so we can start looking out a bit, because there may be a couple grievances being scheduled over the next couple months. So, just kind of be aware of that, we'll be involved with, some hearings in not too distant future. Is there any new business for discussion today? Yes.
Yes, I have, I'm gonna give you more paper than you.
I did not.
And I'm not gonna necessarily go through this all, I just want to make sure that you have it, and I will kind of talk in generalities about what the contents are. You get a binder since you're new.
Okay.
Everyone else else has, you have the same materials that I'm giving Mr. Devereaux, since I understood that many of you have a binder already. I didn't bring one. I'm also giving you, an organizational chart. And again, I'm not gonna go through this in great detail, but just so you have it, it references the city departments and who they report to. And then the second page references the human resources staff and who, what their respective responsibilities are. So you know who's handling what in terms of work within the department. And then, the third page references some of the initiatives that are going on within the human resources department. So again, that's just for your reference. Not gonna spend any time necessarily on that. But let me give you a brief orientation about what's in your binder, Mr. Devereaux, and what you have in front of you, other board members. The first page is really just, the first section here is really just some definitions, and it's specifically on the second page of that first document. It does refer to the Civil Service Board, and it talks briefly about what it is and names the House bill that establishes the Civil Service Board and so forth. So that's the only reason that that piece is included there. I've included what you, let me back up. I've included a copy of the act, and it looks, it's probably about 10 pages into what you have, but it looks like this. And again, I'm not gonna go through it in great detail, but for the benefit of Mr. Devereaux, I just wanna make sure that he has and you all have a copy of the special act that establishes the board. And in it, and we'll go through a little bit of this, but in it, it tells you what the responsibilities of the board are. And I'm gonna talk about some of those things here in just a minute. But I wanna make sure you have that you know you've got that special act in front of you, Mr. Devereaux.
Yes.
It outlines for you the grievance process, it outlines for you the times, the number of days that folks have to file a grievance and things like that. So what I'd like to do now is just talk briefly about the rules of procedure. And these are not your substantive rules, these are you have not established your substantive rules yet. And that's a discussion it sounds like you're gonna have next month with your council. But there are some general rules of procedure that I've included in your packet. And in there, it talks about the members of the board, and as you probably already know, Mr. Devereaux, there are 5 members, 2 are elected by the classified service, 2 are appointed by the city council, and the 5th member is appointed by those 4. The council appoints the chair, and once you have that chair appointed, which will happen most likely at the August 28th council meeting, then generally, the act does call for you to have a vice chair, which I don't believe you have currently. So at your next meeting, once the chair is established by council, you may want to vote to appoint a vice chair at that time. And that person's there then to
We
fill
haven't
in.
had a vice chair since 3
Right.
years that I've served on.
Yeah, that's what I gathered from Mr. Maddox, but there is the opportunity for you to vote on the vice chair if that's something you want to do. Also included in the rules of procedure are information about the meetings, what constitutes a quorum and things of that nature. It also spells out for you the grievance hearings and provides for you what the amount of time is, again, that employees have to file a grievance. It also specifies the kinds of things that a grievance can be filed for. So in our system, any member of the classified service who are covered by the Civil Service Board can file a grievance if they have been discharged, if they have been suspended, if they have been demoted, reduced in rank, or if they've been transferred against their will. And in our system, our definition of transferred against their will is going from one department to another. So for example, in human resources, Jamie can move one manager from being the pay and classification manager to being the benefits manager. Or she can move other employees within her department. Likewise, police can do that. Likewise, public works can do that. They couldn't, however, transfer one of Jamie's human resource manager to public works manager without their agreement to do that. And then when that happens, again, that's considered against their will, and they would have an ability to grieve that through our process. So sometimes we have folks who get moved from one division to another, and they're frustrated and they want to complain or file, and that would not be grievable under our system. We typically have brought to you, to the Civil Service Board, any, such as the thing we've been talking about earlier, any changes in the promotional process for police and fire. Those generally come before you for review as well. And the.
And only those two departments?
Yes, sir.
Right.
The charge generally, or the challenge that you have with regard to grievances is whether or not the act or the complaint was justified, and whether or not the discipline was appropriate for the act that was committed. Because sometimes there's confusion, I think, with folks as to the due process. And by virtue of the employee having, first of all, a pre-disciplinary hearing, so before that discipline takes place, the employee has had a pre-disciplinary hearing in front of their boss to say, this is why I think you shouldn't fire me or shouldn't demote me or whatever. Once that action is taken, that is, again, within those grievable acts that I named earlier, then that employee has the ability to grieve that to the city manager. So that's the second step in their due process. When they are not satisfied with that remedy, then they have the opportunity to come before the Civil Service Board, which is another step in the due process. So our system is set up to allow for the due process to occur for the employee who is grieving. So the responsibility for the Civil Service Board is not whether there has been due process, because clearly there has, that's why they're here, but rather was the act or the complaint justified. And now, your attorney will talk more about that as each grievance comes before you. They help kind of guide that process. And so I'll stop there for a minute, because it looks like you have a question.
I do, because I think due process not only includes the procedural steps that an employee, administrative steps that an employee can take through multiple channels until something gets to us. Due process, I believe, also implies that the applicable policies of the city for that specific grievance have been followed step by step and accurately also.
And I think that I will defer to your counsel and city's counsel to argue that. My professional opinion as a non-lawyer and from what I've experienced with other boards is that due process is being applied by virtue of that employee being able to be heard by independent bodies, which we want them to be heard. Because terminating someone or demoting someone or changing their job in any way is always a very difficult decision, and no one, people want to do that in a fair and appropriate manner. Yes, sir.
And I am aware, at least in one case, it's that far back, that that issue that Marv wrote, or just raised about procedural due process procedural due process was not followed on behalf of the city. And found that the plaintiff in this case was incorrect in his arguments that he brought forth before not only the Civil Service Board, but in his appeal process too.
And I have no familiarity with the
Yeah,
facts of
I
that
mean, our
case.
council can
Yeah.
talk about that at a future meeting.
Yes, and I think one thing that your council does before each grievance is talk about that as you enter into that conversation and that hearing, they will brief you on all those things. So I defer to council on that.
I have
Yes,
just
sir.
maybe a general question along those lines, and if it's best for council, you can tell me that. But does the board, in the grievance process, is it simply looking to ensure that the action was done correctly? And I know that's sort of tempered by this discussion we just had. But does the board also have discretion to say, based on their assessment of the situation, management reached the wrong decision or a
Sure.
different decision? In other words,
Yes, sir.
sometimes you can find that maybe I'm reviewing the same facts, I realize management had some discretion in this realm, but they came up with a conclusion different than the five of us would have.
Right.
Do we have the discretion to make that determination and overturn an action, or are we more of along the lines of saying, well, we may have decided it differently, but management was acting properly within their discretion and came to a different, but in some sense, legitimate conclusion, if you
Sure,
get
yes.
my difference there.
Yes, and I think the answer would be yes to both of those
Okay.
things.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. So, also included in your, in the rules of procedure are definitions of conflict of interest and when you might be called upon to recuse yourself. Yes, sir.
Pardon me.
Yes, sir.
I want to point out something that, at least in the 3 years I've been on the board, we've only, I believe, raised this once, and that's on page 4D, and that allows the board to,
Everybody's civil service law.
on the civil service law, allows the board to have subpoena powers, since we're a quasi-judicial board, and we can request not only an individual to be come forth as a witness, but also request specific documents that relate to the particular grievance. So that is within the state law
Yes.
statute too.
Yes, that is correct. Okay. Again, there are specifics in here about, what that process is for the grievances, and provided that the employee is A, eligible, in other words, covered under the Civil Service Board, and B, the actions such as reduced or demoted, discharged, suspended, et cetera, are the actions that were taken. We have a certain amount of time during which they can make that appeal, and provided that they do so within that time limit, then they are still within that grievance process. Page 5 of that rules of procedure talks about conflicts of interest, which was covered somewhat in the interview process, so I'm sure you're familiar with those. But just so you know, it is defined there. It gives you examples on when there might be considered to be a conflict. There is also procedure for the hearing. It talks a little bit about that. It talks about representation. The city attorney represents the city, and the employee or former employee have the responsibility of securing their representation if they wish to do so. Their, witnesses are brought in generally. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be witnesses. And then the board has the opportunity to vote on the findings based on the testimony and evidence that's presented. And, yes, sir?
I have a question. When, under what conditions does the city bring in outside counsel with the city attorney?
That is a great question, and I will have to answer, I'll have to ask them to answer that. I'm not sure.
Because, you know, we've had a case before us, I can't remember, several months back, where attorney with McGuire Bissett served as co-counsel, I believe, with Mr. Maddox.
Yes, and certainly we would have, and again, I'm fairly new here, so I've only been, I think I've been through one grievance since I've been here. And there would be occasions where you might have, where we would have outside counsel in addition to city counsel. I think that probably is fairly common. But where we might have outside counsel without city counsel at all, I thought that's what you were asking, so. And I'm not sure that we would in any case unless it.
I think the city attorney was sitting at
Was
the
there.
table also,
Yeah.
but
That would be
the,
the hearing, I believe,
It was the
both of
hearing.
them, both were there.
Okay.
Right.
And both
That-
and both examined witnesses, and
Yeah.
they just sort of took turns.
And that I would imagine would be, not every time, but not uncommon, but.
I thought Sabrina served as lead counsel at that time for the city.
I thought she did, but he also did ask
Right.
questions and things like that.
You know, and sometimes the city attorney has been really involved in the process for a very, very long time. And so, you know, from the time of the first disciplinary action kind of thing, and it's possible that you would want additional counsel in those circumstances. But I'll ask them if there's a, kind of a matrix that's used to make those decisions, or if it's just a case-by-case judgment call.
It's just a point of interest.
Yeah, sure. And aside from those documents, and again, including the rules of procedure, the Civil Service Act, I also included the personnel policies, which, as you know, are being revised, so they're, but this is, as we speak, as we sit here, these are the policies that you can find online, for the personnel who work for the city. So, you know, you'll see changes to these over the next several months, but right now, I wanted to make sure you had a copy of what we go by currently.
When they are revised and approved, by council like this, can you provide us with an update?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Mr. Rob,
Yes, sir.
one quick question on page 6 of the rules of procedure.
Yes, sir.
On the vote, it says it should take a majority vote of the quorum. And it's, from reading that, it sounds like the burden of proof is on the city.
Correct.
To show that the grievance is not justified.
Correct.
So if we had 4 members, for instance, that were there, you know, say one was absent, a 2-2 vote, a tie vote would mean that the grievance would stand, that grievance would
Correct.
stand.
That's correct.
Okay.
Hopefully we won't have that situation.
Yes.
We'll be scheduling.
Yeah.
Well enough in advance, so all 5 members would be present. And that was the difficulty we had, not having you on
I
the
see.
board at the
Because you
time,
had that.
and we had to postpone a grievance, into sometime after August 28th, when we have a formal, chair appointed by council.
I see.
Just clarify, you said these would be available online.
Yes, sir.
There's a citation at the bottom left of the pages, shows that it's city intranet. So
It is, you're right, are they on the intranet also? I printed them off the intranet.
Yeah, presently they're on
So not on intern?
Not
Okay,
present.
okay. That will change too, as we're,
Yes.
moving toward revising some of these. We want our information to be publicly available.
Right.
Not just for employees.
Yeah, you had come to us either early this year, or late last year, with a presentation of revisions that were going on with a lot of
Yes.
personnel policies. So they're still in.
They're still in the process.
In the process, okay.
We've had a lot of changes and, challenges, so we haven't made enough progress on that yet.
Okay.
And you will receive copies of it.
One other point of information, following the process of, the grievant employee having gone to their manager, the next step going to the city manager, for the sake of, informing everybody, including our new, member, there's a time frame there that has to be done within, the filing has to be done within.
Right.
You wanna
Within
mention?
that time frame, otherwise it
It's
doesn't move
a,
forward.
it's a, I believe it's a 10-day period.
It is, it depends on the
Upon
step. but-
receiving final notice from the city manager,
Correct.
that the grievance then has to be filed within.
Within the time frame
Time
as
frame.
defined in your, rules of procedure, I have to pull that up, see. From the time the action occurs, so from the time the employee is demoted, for example, they have, I believe, 10 days.
10
is that
days,
Right?
right.
From that period.
Yes.
Yeah, after they receive final notice from the city manager, they must file within 10 days in order to have a grievance heard before us.
Okay.
Now, one thing that wasn't mentioned, and Carol, please join in, you're the attorney. Either party, upon, when the Civil Service Board delivers its decision on a grievance, either party then can appeal to the Superior Court.
Correct.
So, or they can go directly, I understand, as they so choose.
They can.
And bypass the Civil Service Board.
Mhm.
But that gets to
That's
be
my
discussed.
understanding.
Yeah.
I think most litigants come here before they
They
go
do.
to
Yeah.
Superior Court with all that, litigation expense.
Especially if they feel they have a solid case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even once your final ruling is rendered, your decision is rendered, it's still potentially going to go to Superior Court, which is why it's so important. And I noticed your counsel yesterday reminded you all not to discuss among yourselves.
Right.
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 It just kind of reinforces that it's not really over just because you voted on it necessarily. It might be, but it's not necessary.
Does the city have that option as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
Both
outside
parties.
can appeal.
Both parties?
Right, either party.
Mhm. And I believe that didn't take very long, but as you review any of these documents, if you have questions and would like to contact any of us in HR, or certainly your counsel, we're glad to.
Could I ask one more just general
Absolutely,
question?
as many
please.
as you want.
It's just on the sort of the non-grievance side
Yes.
of the Civil Service Board's responsibilities. What determines whether a civil service action or policy or process is sort of reviewable by the Civil Service Board, and what authorities in general would have in those areas?
Well, the act, for one, kind of, spells out what the authority is, but also your substantive rules, which I think you're gonna discuss at your next meeting, begins that conversation. Those substantive rules have to be approved by council. So that is where you really have the opportunity to define what you want to have reviewed as a body. It's not really a technical board. You are a quasi judicial board, and you hear grievances and ensure that that we're following our due process and so forth. But as far as, you know, how pay is established or how, transfers are handled within the system and all that, those are the council and the city manager's authority. I don't know if that helps at all, but,
I think so.
Yeah, further, what the law states, civil service law states, clearly states is that the board has responsibility to hear employee grievances and for promotional processes within the police and fire department. There may be other areas that are gray, but those two are very clearly established by the law. And human resources, the city has generally been, has kept us informed of broader kinds of issues, although we may not have responsibility. But just
Just as a
courtesy.
context, so you have a context of the.
Yeah.
And do cities across the state that are of size of North Carolina, do they all have a civil service boards established by the legislature?
We are only one of 5 cities in the state that has a civil service board. Only one of
and it
5.
might even be 3 now.
No,
Is it-
Raleigh
that
has
changed?
one.
Yeah.
Wilmington.
Oh.
Yeah, 4.
Is it 4?
Okay.
I thought there was 5 from the last time I checked, unless that changed.
Yeah.
Who's,
Charlotte.
Charlotte was abolished? Okay, because the last time I checked, they had a civil service board, but that was a couple years back when I looked.
No more than 5.
No more than
Definitely
that.
no more.
So it's unique.
Yeah.
You know, the 100 counties and all the cities in the state to be one of 5 or one of 4.
I see.
Yeah.
Is there any history or documentation on someone that was sort of interested in understanding the evolution of civil service boards in North Carolina? Has that ever been published anywhere?
I don't know that it's necessarily published, but we could certainly do some research.
I mean, there's PhDs on everything, right?
That's right, there probably was a dissertation.
And I'm not one of those, by the way.
Okay.
Background's pharmacy.
Yeah, the Institute of Government may have some material.
Yes, they probably do.
The school, UNC.
But we'll look at it, that'll be a good project for an intern.
But actually, this board goes back to 1953.
Right, that's the initial, and it's changed several times since, amended, revised, you know. I had just, to me, it's interesting, and, you know, it's a sidebar issue that I just had with Carol, but, there's the legal term de novo, which means that this, a higher court, being a superior court, can act as if the case was not heard by the Civil Service Board. But Carol also brought up, and so you're almost starting from fresh beginning. Carol brought up an interesting point in that witnesses on from both parties are sworn in. And a witness, as Carol mentioned, and you might expand on this, can be impeached if, in fact, they're found, even though it's a de novo, that their testimony was given different in the before the Civil Service Board than before the Superior Court and or appeals courts. So, you know, it is still a very much a legal process.
I see.
And we follow particular rules, procedural rules of the court, even at the commission level.
I see. Interesting.
That's why it's
Yeah.
important that we have Carol here and our outside counsel present too when we're having hearings.
Also unique, correct me if I'm wrong, that the only 2 boards that I'm aware of in the city that can make, I don't know if the term is legal rulings, but ourselves in planning and zoning.
That's
Are
correct.
the
Only
inputs, and take those inputs and use them to help, get sort of buy-in from, employees to say, we put this before the civil service board, they give us some comments, and we revise it a little bit, do you have that option?
Yeah, that's actually a very good use of time that we have together as we move, especially as we move forward with these changes, is input and support for the changes. You know, which is different from your authority to say you can't terminate that
Right.
person. But that input is helpful because you have broad expertise and experience in other organizations. And that's helpful. And then additionally, to be able to share with employees that you supported that is also helpful.
Especially the fire chief has been a regular in the last year or so with promotional procedure changes for the fire department, so.
And the procedure changes.
And there may be more of those, you know, as time goes on, where, you know, the world changes and, we have to change with it. So there may be other opportunities to talk about those kinds of procedures moving forward.
And the statute speaks specifically to those two departments, you know, process, procedural changes and promotion. So Chief Hooper or Chief Burnett, or his acting chief now, would bring those changes before us. And we can provide comments at that time and input.
And, sorry, this just triggers another question.
That's what this is.
So, how about members of the public? Are they able to attend either
Yes, sir.
grievance or,
They are.
on regular sessions?
All the meetings that you have are noticed, so the public has the opportunity to attend any and all, and they do sometimes.
And with grievances, both the city and the grievant have the right to request a closed hearing or an open hearing.
Yeah.
And generally, the hearings are open to the public, but there have been some closed hearings.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah, they can object, and then I think the board has the ultimate decision. If the city objects to an open hearing and can persuade the board due to the sensitive natures of matters considered, an open hearing may violate, 168 through 168. It's in the board's discretion, subject to a vote, whether to proceed with a closed hearing.
So page 5 of the
Excuse me.
statute.
Yeah, I thought I had just seen that.
Yeah.
But absent that request.
And still, the way I understand it and the way I read it is, it's really kind of, case specific. It wouldn't just be I shouldn't say generic case, because there really is no such thing, but if it's just somebody came to work late and that was why they were fired, that wouldn't necessarily be sensitive enough. But if it was like sexual harassment or something of that nature, that might be viewed as more sensitive and more in consideration of a closed meeting.
Thanks.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Appreciate it.
Just
That's
homework.
why
I
we're
just
here
have homework to
today.
do.
Yeah.
Plenty of reading.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your attention and time.
Since we do not have any members, well, one member of the public present, as we would be welcoming public comment now.
No public comment for me.
I did mention our next, meeting, which will be, September the 6th, 2:30. This room will always have our, unless, for a special reason why we wouldn't be meeting in this, room, it's always 6th floor training room. I think that's all I have on our agenda for today. Any other comments comments or points that we wanna bring up? Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion, I move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Okay, all in support of that?